I stared at my wife across the table and felt the ground tilt under me. She had quit her job that morning, hadn't told me a thing, and then looked at me like it was the most natural thing in the world to ask, "Can you cover my $2,800 this month?" That sentence landed like a punch I didn't see coming, and for the next several hours, and then days, my brain looped that number like a broken record while my heart tried to keep up with the fact that the person I trusted most in the world had made a life-changing decision without ever including me in the conversation. We'd been married 4 years, kept our finances largely separate by mutual agreement, and split household expenses down the middle. It worked for us because it respected our independence while still honoring our partnership. We talked about vacations, renovations, and long-term plans. We did not, however, talk about one of us quitting a steady job on a whim. What followed wasn't just an awkward financial conversation, it set off a chain reaction that revealed fissures I hadn't known were there, forced me to examine what partnership truly means, and pushed both of us to grapple with shame, pride, mental health, and responsibility in ways we hadn't before. The moment she said she quit, everything slowed. Her smile stayed on her face like she expected me to be happy for her. I asked the obvious questions: why? When? What's the plan? And the answers were vague and half-formed. Tired. Need a break. Find myself. I'll figure it out. There was no backup plan. No savings target she'd been working toward. No conversation. The most specific thing she offered was the $2,800 figure that would cover her rent, car payment, and credit card minimums. "You earn more than I do," she said, as if that fact alone made the request reasonable. The irony was that we'd always agreed not to use income inequality as a lever of control or obligation. We'd built a system to prevent precisely this kind of expectation. Sitting there, I felt a tidal wave of emotions: anger at the unilateral decision, fear about the sudden strain on our shared life, a sharp sting of betrayal that she didn't trust me enough to say, "I'm unhappy. Can we talk about options?" But underneath all that was empathy, a rising understanding that maybe she was at the end of her rope. That maybe weeks or months of stress had led her to a breaking point where quitting felt like survival. Those inner contradictions made me respond in ways that only made the situation worse. I told her I couldn't cover her full $2,800 lifestyle bills, that I'd continue to pay our shared expenses and help with essentials, but I couldn't take on her independent obligations indefinitely. Her reaction was immediate and visceral: tears, accusations that I didn't love her, and a public narrative on social media painting me as the villain who refused to support his wife. Suddenly our private rift became a public spectacle. Friends and family weighed in the way they always do online and offline. Some said I was callous, that marriage meant unconditional support and I should just sign the checks. Others said I was making a principled stand and protecting us from enabling irresponsible behavior. Strangers on Reddit dissected our story like it was a case study. Some commenters ran through the math and asked why she hadn't saved an emergency fund. Others offered hard-earned wisdom about burnout and the invisible labor of emotional load. Every opinion landed on me like tiny pebbles. None of them felt big enough to fix the hole in our relationship. We'd had open conversations about money before. They'd always been adult and practical. This wasn't just a budget issue. It was about communication and respect. If she'd said 2 weeks earlier, "I'm miserable, I might quit unless something changes," we could have planned. I could have offered to step in temporarily on shared bills while she gave notice or sought a less toxic position. We could have rearranged our expenses or delayed the renovation we were saving for. But she hadn't asked. She'd acted, then expected me to make her unilateral decision harmless. When I called that out, she accused me of being selfish. When I asked for a plan, she accused me of being unsupportive. It turned into a blame match neither of us were equipped to win. I tried to break down the numbers with her calmly, not because I wanted to be a gatekeeper, but because I needed to know if her expectations were realistic and how they would affect our shared obligations. Her rent was $1,200, car payment $350, credit card minimums $450, and a handful of subscriptions and debts added the rest. We'd agreed that mortgage, utilities, and groceries were shared, which left me with my own student loans and car payment that I could not realistically double pay. When I ran the math, my monthly budget didn't have a spare $2,800. That didn't mean I was unwilling to help. It meant that full coverage would require sacrifices that would put me at risk. I offered a compromise: cover an agreed-upon emergency cushion for a set period, help with essentials, and set a deadline for reassessment. She rejected it as insufficient. She wanted full support with no timeline. That was the sticking point. In the days after she left to stay with her mother for a few nights, a break she said she needed to escape the pressure, we both had time to reflect. I sat down with our monthly statements and built a projection worksheet. On paper, the numbers were manageable for a few months if we tightened our discretionary spending and paused certain savings. But manageable didn't mean sustainable, and it didn't mean fair. Financial altruism at the cost of long-term resentment is a slow-burning poison in a relationship. I kept finding myself thinking about stories from friends. One couple who'd survived a similar episode because they had transparent accounts and regular check-ins. Another who had divorced after one spouse continually rescued the other financially. Those contrasts made me cautious. There was also the emotional labor of handling the fallout. Her social posts started a small chorus of friends who sided with her, some genuinely concerned, others pushing a narrative that made me look like the bad guy without the context. I received messages calling me cold. My phone buzzed with judgment. It would have been easier to bow to public pressure if this were solely about money. But it wasn't. It was about the principle that major life decisions in a partnership require dialogue. If we couldn't agree on that, then the $2,800 wasn't the real problem. The problem was the breakdown in trust. Her explanation, when she finally gave more than one-word answers, was layered. She talked about microaggressions at work, a supervisor who constantly undermined her, headaches that wouldn't go away, panic that showed up at 3 a.m., and a pervasive feeling that her identity was reduced to productivity. She felt exhausted and small. The job had become a place where her boundaries were ignored, and quitting felt like reclaiming herself. I recognized the truth in that. I've been there in different ways. But reclaiming oneself doesn't erase obligations overnight, and it doesn't absolve the person from considering the impacts on those closest to them. When I told her that, she said I was minimizing her suffering. When I insisted on the need for communication, she said I was prioritizing money over her mental health. It felt like we were each speaking different languages. We began to have deeper conversations about roles, expectations, and gendered assumptions in marriage. The idea that husbands should be providers is baked into many cultures, and she leaned on that expectation when she framed the ask as obvious. I pushed back not from a denial of provision, but from a desire for equity and mutual respect. I wanted promises that support would be temporary, contingent on effort and a realistic plan. She wanted unconditional refuge. Both positions have moral weight, and the tension between them has fueled countless relationship debates for generations. We were living through one. Practical steps started to feel necessary even as we navigated emotions. I suggested she speak to a career counselor or therapist to process the burnout and plan next steps. She agreed, though reluctantly, and took an appointment. We also agreed, tentatively, to a financial triage. I would help cover shared essentials and some immediate needs for 1 month. She would apply for unemployment where possible, cut discretionary expenses, and make concrete job search efforts. We created a checklist, update resume, set 2 job applications per week, reach out to 3 former colleagues, and research temp or freelance options. Putting action items on paper helped diffuse some of the binary thinking. It made her agency part of the recovery rather than her passivity. But even with a plan, the emotional aftermath lingered. I couldn't shake the image of her smiling as she said, "I quit," as if she'd already decided to sidestep consequences. I replayed old moments where communication was good, searching for why she'd chosen silence this time. In therapy, she admitted that the shame of admitting defeat at work made her avoid telling me. She feared being a burden. That made me feel compassion, but also sadness, for both of us. Our mutual pride had become a barrier to honesty. I realized that I had to create a space where she could say hard things without fear. That meant adjusting my responses, listening more, and holding boundaries with love. There were practical conversations about credit score implications, rent obligations, and car repossession risks. I helped her call the credit card company to inquire about hardship programs and negotiated a short extension on one payment. We spoke with her landlord about a potential payment plan. Small acts like these created a scaffolding of safety without me becoming her indefinite bank. They also shifted the dynamic from me paying everything to us solving problems together, which felt healthier. The public reaction online continued to be a pressure cooker. Some Reddit threads labeled me as inconsiderate. Others praised me for setting boundaries. It was tempting to engage and defend my position in long comment threads, but I learned quickly that public opinion rarely helps private healing. Instead, I focused on rebuilding trust with actions, transparency in our finances, weekly check-ins, and concrete milestones for her job search. Those check-ins weren't just about money. They were about how she was feeling and how we were communicating. It forced us to practice the very skill we had skipped when she made her decision: dialogue. Over the months, she did find work, not the ideal job immediately, but a position with better hours and a manager who seemed more attentive to employee well-being. The first paycheck was a relief in a way that can't be described: relief at reduced financial strain and relief at her regained sense of purpose. That said, the road back wasn't linear. There were relapses into doubt, panic about bills that still needed attention, and lingering resentment about how the decision was made. We attended couples counseling, which helped us explore not just the event but the underlying dynamics: fear of vulnerability, differing communication styles, and the ways our families taught us to handle crisis. In counseling, we learned to reframe certain narratives. Instead of "you abandoned me financially," she learned to hear, "I felt blindsided and unprepared." Instead of "you won't help me," I learned to hear, "I was desperate and ashamed." Those subtle shifts in language changed the tone of our conversations. We also developed a concrete financial safety plan, an emergency fund both of us contribute to each month, agreed upon steps before making major career moves, and a shared calendar for financial check-ins. The emergency fund wasn't about restricting freedom. It was about creating a mutual safety net that respected both autonomy and interdependence. Looking back, this crisis forced me to confront what partnership truly means. It's messy, and it's rarely one thing or another. It's not unconditional financial surrender, nor is it rigid refusal to help. It's a negotiated space where empathy meets accountability. I love my wife, and I chose to help her, but I also chose to insist on dignity and reciprocity. I wanted her to feel safe asking for help without weaponizing our marriage as a blank check. She needed to learn that her well-being matters, but so does our shared future. If I had to distill the lesson in blunt terms: communicate early, plan together, and keep financial transparency alive. If you're the person thinking of quitting your job because your mental health is suffering, tell your partner first and work with them on a plan. If you're the partner on the receiving end of that news, offer compassion but insist on a concrete plan and boundaries so you don't become the person who rescues at the cost of long-term resentment. Neither response is exact. Both require patience, humility, and sometimes professional help. We're not perfect, and we probably never will be, but we're alive to the hard work now: rebuilding trust, repairing damage, and learning to ask for help in ways that invite collaboration instead of compulsion. The $2,800 was never really about dollars and cents for me. It was about whether two people who vowed to share a life could actually do the hard work of sharing it when the stakes were highest. We're still figuring that out, one difficult conversation at a time, and I hope our story helps someone else avoid the same blind side.